Joining me now, Rob Wittman. Congressman Wittman, great to have you with us on this Friday.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you.
How's your campaign going?
It's going well. We're staying very, very busy. Been out on the road constantly, getting great response from folks, and we're just out there working hard.
Let's talk about the anonymous op-ed from the rat weasel, the piece of turtle turd, as I say, the sellout, allegedly in the White House. I just can't believe this. First of all, I can't believe somebody would write this anonymously that works there. And the New York Times said a senior White House official. So that means you're not a middle agency type person. And secondly, I'm just flabbergasted that the New York Times published this thing. I mean, I've been a publisher, and I've been an editorial page editor and an editorial page writer and an opinion page editor. And we would even never considered during my tenure printing anything like this anonymously. So the New York Times does it, and they do a dance over it. I mean, what's the deal here, Congressman?
Well, listen, if you are within the administration working for the president and you don't believe fully in the president's efforts, then I think the first thing you should do is to resign and leave. And if you want to differ with the president, everybody has the right to be able to do that. But reveal who you are. First of all, resign and reveal who you are. Then you can say, this is what I feel. But it is just, I think, not the way to go about, first of all, your job working in the executive branch, to do things anonymously, and then feel like you can continue to work there and be effective. And, this letter said, hey, listen, I don't like the way the president operates. The results are good, but I just don't like the way the president operates. Well, if you don't like that, and the president's unconventional, but let me tell you, the results speak for themselves. And because you don't agree with the president's methods, that is the writer of this, if you don't agree with the president's methods, then resign and reveal yourself. But how do you go about writing something anonymously and then expecting to still stay within the administration and to be effective? That's beyond me. And as you said, for the paper to print something anonymously with no specifics as to why they believe the president isn't operating properly is just for sensationalism. It's not for substance. So it's really disturbing to me, both that somebody from within the administration would not reveal themselves. Secondly, would not say, hey, if I feel that way, then I'm going to first resign. And then thirdly, why would the New York Times print this anonymously other than as another effort to try to find ways to highlight what they have continuously attacked the president about, and that is the way that he operates. And listen, he does things differently, but you look at the results, and I tell you, it's hard to argue with the results.
Well, this is why we're going down this path, because I have this question to all the Democrats that come on my show running for office. By the way, we've reached out to Angie Williams, your opponent, and offered her equal time. They turned it down. So just so for the record. But the bottom line is, and I asked them all, I mean, do you like this economy or not? And if you do, what are you going to do to change it? Or are you going to change it? Or are you just going to keep the same policies? Because 4.2% GDP growth last quarter. We're going to get 4.5% this quarter. We're going to get a new jobs number coming out in 15 minutes. That's going to be a great number we've heard. We've got unemployment under 4%. Congressman, it's only been under 4% 3 times in the last 49 years in America, 2 of those under President Trump. I mean, I could go on and on and on about consumer spending and the confidence that people have and small business spending and everything. This economy is just roaring. And I don't know if you're running as a Democrat and I guess you want to impeach the president because you don't like his tweets or something. I mean, well, what are your policies? Bernie Sanders, $32 trillion nationalizing medicine? I mean, is that what you're going to run on? I don't see it. We're with Rob Wittman. He is running for re-election. He represents the 1st District of Virginia. That's kind of the central Virginia area up through Fredericksburg and he is a Republican. He's also chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces. Congressman, let's get to foreign policy, may we?
Sure.
A lot of us very concerned with the Yemeni crisis. 50,000 casualties so far in Yemen. We understand that there is a civil war going on, but the United States is part of the Emiratis Saudi coalition in advising Saudi pilots with routes and other things in order to drop bombs. The bomb that blew up the school bus is a U.S.-made bomb that went with the Saudi $1.1 billion defense spending package that they paid for. And we're in there with the United Kingdom, and this thing is getting very ugly. And it's hard for Americans. I'm bringing attention to it. New York Times would rather run phony op-eds, but I'm trying to bring attention to it. But it's a very serious situation with no end in sight. Why are we there?
Well, we've been there as a partner to the Saudis, and as you know, what's happened there with the Houthis in Yemen, there's essentially been this tension that continues to build within the Middle East, which goes back historically, John, as you know, between Iranian-backed forces there and Saudi-backed forces. So I think it's a continuation of what we've seen in the power struggle that's gone on for centuries there in the Middle East. This is just an extension of it. And yes, there are efforts there by the Saudis against the Yemenis to counter what they see as a threat to Saudi Arabia. As you know, there have been incursions back and forth across the borders there. These fights now have accelerated, and it's really it boils down to going back to Sunni and Shia divisions in the region, and this is how it's manifesting itself there with this conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen.
Why don't we get out of this?
Well, I think we are not, as you point out, we're not directly involved. We are there advising the Saudis. The Saudis do buy a lot of military hardware from the United States, and we have continued that relationship. I think too, there's a whole calculus there as we look at, who is behind not just the Yemeni fighters there, but others that are involved in this conflict, and how does that reflect upon the policy the nation has towards Iran and Iran's effort there to create this Shia crescent in the region. Obviously, this is outside of that particular area, but they are looking to influence in areas outside of the immediate Shia crescent that they're trying to create there within the within the Iranian region of the Middle East, off of the Arabian Peninsula.
Well, Congressman Wittman, you know what my position is on this for a long time. I mean, the neocons and the military-industrial complex, they have to find a boogeyman somewhere. And now it's Iran, and tomorrow will be the Russian bear, and the next day it'll be someone else. I mean, it's very difficult, and I even see you in this conversation we're having. I mean, it's very difficult to justify, why the United States is involved in this battle. And, I mean, you look at what the Saudis were attempting to do, which is get the Houthis out, right? Get the Iranian influence out of Yemen. They hate Iran.
Yes.
I get that, right? We all get that. But you look at the money they've spent on this war. I mean, if MBS just took all that money and went to the Yemenis people and said, I'm going to invest all this money in your country, but you got to get the Houthis out. You get them out, I'm going to build roads, I'm going to build bridges, I'm going to build schools, I'm going to dump all this money to build your country, he'd have a better result than he's having now. And so it just seems like it perpetuates, and because the New York Times is obsessed with Russian collusion and CNN wants to talk about Bob Woodward's ridiculous book that came out, nobody is covering it. And I think it's sad.
Well, John, I think it's a great discussion point to make. I do think that the policy there that the Saudis are pursuing is one that should be out there for discussion. It is one that I do think that Secretary Pompeo should broach with the Saudis. I think that there is a reasonable way to go to make sure that you're not accelerating this conflict. I know that the Saudis would argue, and I know that as we've gone there and met, the Saudis would argue that they have tried that this is really an Iranian proxy effort, and that they're fighting for there to be a balance in the region. I realize that's the Saudi perspective. It is different than what I think probably a lot of us perceive there, and what the Saudis are doing as far as their efforts. I do think that there are opportunities earlier on, John, to decelerate this conflict. As obviously, the Saudis have decided that they are going to accelerate the conflict for a variety of reasons, and we have made a policy decision. I say we, the administration has made a policy decision to say that we're going to be there to support the Saudis.
All right. Well, we're going to keep following it. I appreciate your weighing in on that. Congressman Rob Wittman with us, Dr. Rob Wittman. He is a Republican. He represents the 1st District of Virginia, that is in the Central Virginia area. He's running for re-election on November 6th, so don't forget to mark that on your calendar. And we have Rob Wittman rated there as a very heavy favorite and pretty much a safe seat. But you still have to work hard because you never know. You've got to talk to your constituents. Congressman, let's get to Paraguay. That's why I love having you on, because we can talk about anything. And by the way, when I get all my congressmen on, there's never any topics, like what topics are you going to talk about, right? I mean, Rob Wittman, Dave Bratt, Barbara Comstock, Bobby Scott, they just call in, Mark Warner, and we can ask them anything, and I appreciate that. Congressman, so Paraguay in South America, so they moved their embassy in Israel along with the U.S. After the U.S., they followed the U.S. lead, and they moved their embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. And so that was the second country. It kind of gave credibility to the whole thing, and that was a movement, if you will, that started. But now they say they're going to move it back to Tel Aviv under pressure, and it's now been absolutely commended by the Arab League. What? You move your embassy, then you're moving it back? What is Paraguay's thinking here?
I don't know. John, as you point out, I think it's totally due to pressure from a variety of different countries around the world. I'm sure pressure is being put on them in a number of different ways. Paraguay, being a fairly small country, I'm sure has gotten some not only political and diplomatic pressure, but I'm sure probably some economic pressures that have pushed them, unfortunately, to capitulate from what I thought was a very thoughtful move for them to say, yes, we're going to place our embassy there in Jerusalem. It's it's part of what we see a lot of times in the international politics of things, and I've seen it in a number of different realms where you have countries that that will take a certain position on an issue and state that publicly, and then when they get to either a meeting with other countries or get pressured there, when push comes to shove, unfortunately those countries will give in. And I watch that when we have these international forums where they're creating policy. A great example is when the nations get together and put together fisheries policies, and you figure out what nation gets to catch how many of the fish to make sure that the fish can continue on. And the nations, before they get there, say, oh, yes, we agree to these limitations. We agree that the allocation should go fairly to these countries. And then you get there and you figure out that these other countries are now putting a tremendous amount of pressure, especially on these smaller countries, John. That's what happens. The smaller countries get bullied by the bigger countries, and they get threatened. I mean, this is part of the back and forth, is they get threatened to say, well, if you agree to this particular limitation on our country and its fisheries, then here's the retaliation that we're going to take upon you, so therefore don't agree to it. And I think that's probably the same thing that happens with Paraguay. And being a small country, they are particularly susceptible to those types of pressures where, both economic and political can come to bear. And that's what I think ended up with this, with them reversing their decision.
Very interesting, but I think you're right. I mean, they're a small little country. I think when they did it, they thought it was the right thing to do. They certainly wanted to curry favor with U.S. and the Trump administration, but a lot of pressure being put on them. That the House is convening today to debate the Community Security and Safety Act. Do you have a position on this?
Well, I've been following the debate back and forth on it, and I'm going to follow the debate today too, John, on the floor, and we'll see where it all ends up. I'm still listening to a variety of different viewpoints there, so I haven't made up my mind finally on the bill, but I'm anxious to hear how the debate unfolds today.
Your leadership has said that they're determined to bring a vote to the floor on permanently extending the Trump tax cuts to people, because it's just taxpayers, because they made the corporate one permanent, and for inside baseball, making the sausage reasons, just to put it bluntly, they had to sunset on paper the tax cut for individuals, I think in a 7-year period, in order to meet certain numbers in the Senate. Now the House wants to make that permanent. Is that going to happen before November the 6th?
I think it has to, John. There are a number of things that have to go along with that. There are some other technical corrections that need to occur also with the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So I think what's going to happen is they'll combine both the technical corrections there, and some of those are things that affect retailers, and if those aren't done by November the 5th, for a variety of different reasons and how quarterly reporting goes, then it becomes problematic for those folks. So I do think that they're going to have to do that. These technical corrections are going to have to be made. If not, you create a big issue for a number of folks in the business community. At the same time, you ought to make these tax cuts permanent. And as you know, one of the criticisms has been, well, you made the tax cuts permanent for businesses, but you didn't do so for individuals. So those folks that were in disagreement with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and were the critics there, this should be an opportunity for them to vote in favor of tax cuts for individuals and making them permanent. So, yes, I do believe that it absolutely has to happen before November 6th.
Be interesting to see how many Democrats vote in opposition to that vote no. That's going to be interesting.
It is because one of the critiques that they had about the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that the tax cuts for individuals were not permanent, and many of them were in favor of making it permanent. So it will be interesting to see who votes yes or no on this bill when it comes to the floor.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank Rob Wittman for being with us. Hey, one of the things that we have in common, Dr. Wittman, Congressman Wittman, one of the things that you and I have in common is on Fridays, we both get out of town and drive home on I-95 traffic. I will say.
we both understand intimately the transportation issues that Virginia faces.
Take Amtrak. That's what I now started to do. John Fredericks Radio Network. I like Amtrak, right? I like it. It goes right to Norfolk, but the schedule's not so good.